Every Monday and Friday, we have been looking at a new entry in the Alien franchise for the month of September. Last week, we covered Alien and Aliens. Today, we are kicking off the week talking about perhaps the most infamous Alien movie, at least one of the most infamous Alien movie, Alien 3. Hi, my name's Zach, and I started this YouTube channel because I cannot watch a movie without needing to talk about it afterwards. And if that sounds like you, you're in the right place. Consider hitting that subscribe button. Also, I want this to be a conversation between me and you, so comment down below your thoughts and opinions on Alien 3. I know there's a lot of opinions on Alien 3 out there, so I definitely want to hear what you have to say. A lot of people hate this film. Am I one of them? Well, let's talk about what works about Alien 3. And when it comes to Alien 3, this is infamous for having just a horrible production, especially for David Fincher. David Fincher is now a very well established and beloved director. In fact, all three of the directors of the original Alien trilogy, I guess you can call it, are all very well established directors. You've got Ridley Scott, you've got James Cameron, now you've got David Fincher. And by far, the person who had it the worst while making an Alien film was David Fincher, because he was new, fresh blood. He was not established in Hollywood yet as David Fincher. So the studio, when making Alien 3, they really didn't have any idea of what they wanted Alien 3 to be. All they knew is that they wanted to make a new Alien film and make money.
As a studio, we set out to make a release date and not make a movie.
So Alien 3, throughout its entire production, it was constantly changing hands in script writing. The story changed a bunch of times, where at one point it was going to be about Ripley on this planet with monks that was just made of nothing but wood, and then there was going to be some prisoner story that they came up with. Ripley wasn't even going to be involved. It was going to be a totally new protagonist.
It was a question of whether she wanted to do a third one. There was always that lingering question from those, since no women turned out for Alien 2 either. So there was a question of, couldn't we try to develop a male action hero for the franchise?
Eventually, they landed on the idea of taking kind of that monk planet idea and the prison idea and squishing them together to make Alien 3. And David Fincher really didn't have much control over this production. The studio was constantly over his watch. They were constantly second guessing everything this man was doing, and it caused for such a rough experience for David Fincher that he's basically disowned this movie.
The movie got greenlit based on a whole different version of the script, and David was forced to deal with that in a very short period of time, where he had to design the alien, he had to design the sets, and he had to write the script all the way into the depths of production.
So in a lot of ways, this movie's actually unfinished because David Fincher was supposed to do a bunch of these reshoots and additional scenes, but they never ended up getting done.
I think the idea was that we had to stop. We didn't wrap the film. We stopped shooting.
So what you got in the final product wasn't really what it was supposed to be in the final product. So why am I mentioning all this in our what worked segment of the video? Well, for me, I feel like a lot of the behind the scenes just turmoil and problems that were happening don't really translate that much on the screen in Alien 3 for me. David Fincher wanted to take Alien 3 back to the roots of the first Alien. He wanted this to be a secluded, isolated film, back to the thriller. James Cameron went a little bit more into the action realm. He wanted to bring it back into the survival thriller. And I feel like the story of Alien 3 does provide that for me. I like the idea of Ripley alone on this planet with these prisoners, where this planet is basically just one big prison holding the worst of the worst men. And Ripley is now in the midst amongst all of them with no way to get out. And with her comes an alien who is now picking off these prisoners one by one. And in classic Alien fashion, no one believes Ripley that there's an alien out there. And talking about Ripley coming into this movie, I think Sigourney Weaver, this might be my favorite performance of Sigourney Weaver. She's fantastic in Alien 1. She's excellent in Aliens. But there's something that's so harsh and hard-edged about Ripley in Alien 3, where all of the experiences that she's had up until this point makes total sense for the character, and I really like seeing Sigourney Weaver grow as Ripley over the course of these films. And when you get to Alien 3, the character has completely changed from where she started in Alien, and I feel like that arc you can see so clearly when you get to Alien 3. It also gives Ripley a little bit of a love interest with Clemens, the doctor on this prison planet, and I actually kind of liked their dynamic throughout the course of the film. I liked it a little bit more than Ripley and Hicks, which I think is a little bit controversial to say, but I just feel like they did a little bit more building with it in Alien 3 than Hicks and Ripley in Aliens. And when it comes to the alien in Alien 3, they also do a great job of once again expanding and exploring the mythology and lore of the alien creature, where this movie establishes that the alien kind of takes on the anatomy of whatever creature it impregnates. With the dog in this film, we see that the alien is a little bit more animalistic. And I like that idea. I like the idea of not just changing up the alien a little bit, changing up the design just a little bit here and there, but the fact that this creature, whatever it impregnates, is kind of taking on the traits and the abilities of. I think that's a really cool and unique idea, which some of the entries later on in the Alien series also took from this movie. So I do think that Alien 3 has a couple things to attribute to the Alien mythology and the Alien franchise that are actually really positive things for me. And I do think that David Fincher here does direct some pretty fun and suspenseful sequences throughout Alien 3 that do harken back to Alien. For example, that sequence where all the prisoners are trying to capture the alien and they're running through the corridors and they're trying to shut down all the doors, and they're calling out to each other of where the alien is and which doors they have to shut down. There's some really good suspense and thrills that come from that sequence. So a lot of Alien fans write off Alien 3. And we'll talk about why in just a little bit. But for me, I've always kind of liked Alien 3. I do think it's the weakest of the original Alien trilogy, but I do think there's a lot of merit here that does work for me. But with that said, let's talk about what doesn't work about Alien 3, because there's definitely a lot here that doesn't work. Let's just talk about the elephant in the room. This movie starts off literally in the opening credits killing off Hicks and Newt on the ship that they literally escaped from the aliens on in Aliens. They show that there was an egg in there somehow, a face hugger got out, and Newt and Hicks died in the process as Ripley crash landed on this planet. And even me, who likes Alien 3, this is a very odd and off-putting decision to make, especially since in James Cameron's Aliens, he does so much to endear you to Ripley and Newt's relationship, and even Newt and Hicks and Ripley's relationship in Aliens. There's such a great sense of accomplishment and victory when those characters defeat the Queen Alien and get on the ship, and it ends with them going off to dream all the way home.
James Cameron used to always talk about the possibilities of Alien 3 and what would happen. And James Cameron always used to tell us that he always kind of planned on Ripley, Hicks, and Newt going back to Earth and being a family.
And then you immediately pop in Alien 3, and the first thing you see is Newt and Hicks are dead, to the point that they even do an autopsy on the body of Newt. They actually have like a pretty well-made dummy of little Carrie Hen that they literally cut into and cut up to see if there's any alien impregnation in the little child's body. And this is like within the first 15 minutes of Alien 3. And I do feel like that is a very bleak and a very nihilistic way to begin the film. At the same time, with the story that they're telling in Alien 3, I don't know if Hicks and Newt necessarily fit in the story of this installment. And when you're making a movie and you're telling a story has to come before character. I definitely would have loved to have seen Newt and Hicks live beyond Aliens, but if I'm being honest, I don't really see a little girl Newt running around this this prisoner planet with all of these evil men who have killed and done terrible things to women, and are even doing terrible things to Ripley throughout the course of the film.
It rhymes with grape!
That being said, I still don't like the decision to kill them off, but that isn't new in horror films either. There are tons of horror films where a character lives at the end of a film, and then the next installment we open up and they either get killed or we find out that they died. The difference here is it was a little girl, and it was in a movie that didn't really resemble a straight-on horror film, so it had this sense of, we want to see these characters live on, but now we're back in a straight-up horror movie, so they kill off the characters like traditional horror does, but it feels a little bit weird and off-putting because that's not the movie that these characters were in previously. Also, I do think that the characters here are the least enjoyable of the Alien franchise, because you're on this planet full of prisoners who have done horrible things, admit to doing horrible things, and they even do horrible things to Ripley in the movie, that it's hard to really get invested in their survival. I want Ripley to survive, but in order for Ripley to survive, all these prisoners have to work together to survive, and these characters are not good characters. They're all bad people. They're all terrible people, and very few of them have redemption arcs or moments throughout the movie. For the majority of it, you're just watching a bunch of prisoners who have admitted to doing horrible, terrible things, and you're rooting for them, or the movie wants you to root for them to live, and I just never get there. Also, when it comes to the effects, especially in the original Alien trilogy, they are the weakest of the three films thus far, because they do try to use a little bit more computer graphics in this film than the previous films do. They had some models that they'd hold in front of blue screen and they'd key into scenes, but they don't look naturally there. There's a couple sequences where the alien is kind of straight up in front of Ripley, and you can kind of see the disconnect between the two sequences as the alien was keyed into the scene afterwards. So that kind of disappoints me. Also, there's a storyline in here that Ripley is in fact impregnated by an alien. It's supposed to be a queen alien, and she kind of goes the whole movie with this thing inside her, and it's not till the very end of the film, when they want to kill off Ripley, that she sacrifices herself. And as she sacrifices herself to the death, the chest burster comes out of her chest as she falls into the molten lava pit, and that's just a longer timeline for some reason than we've ever seen in Alien up until this point. Usually when a character gets impregnated by the alien, it's busting out within the next 5 minutes of that character on screen. The fact that Ripley is able to go this whole movie, which takes over the course of, I believe they say 2 weeks at least, it's a little bit weird that they prolonged the chest bursting scene that long for the sake of plot and story, when it's established in the previous films they come out a little bit quicker than that. But all that said, like I said, I do enjoy Alien 3. It's got tons of flaws, it's got tons of problems, and I don't blame anybody who doesn't like Alien 3, because it literally puts a sour taste in your mouth within the first 5 minutes of the film. But I do think it's a beautifully shot film. I think the instincts to go back to the suspense and the horror and the isolation feel that David Fincher had does work for me in this film. I think Sigourney Weaver here, once again, as Ripley, gives a great performance, and it's competently directed by one of the best directors out there right now. So for me, for all those reasons, I'm going to give Alien 3 a weak recommend. I don't think it's a bad film. It's a film I don't mind putting on after watching Aliens, even if those first couple minutes do bother me a little bit. I think the rest of the movie is pretty solid. So don't forget to come back on Friday for my review of Alien Resurrection. If you want to check out the rest of the Alien series reviews, we've got a playlist right up there. Right down there is the most recently uploaded video to the channel. As always, guys, thank you so much for watching, and don't just watch movies, talk movies. Take care.